Hello, I'm Chris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. In the 4th century BC, Greek philosopher Plato wrote, "The spiritual eyesight improves as the physical eyesight declines." His words imply that aging and spirituality go hand in hand, but do they? A recent study by the Pew Research Center found that 30% of 20-somethings were religiously unaffiliated, but only 15% of baby boomers characterized themselves that way. And among the parents of boomers, only 5% claimed no religious affiliation. Couple that with the fact that the fastest growing segment of seminary students is the over 50 demographic, and you have to wonder, is there a link between growing old and growing more spiritual?
Preaching is spoken communication of divine truth with a view of persuasion.
It had been 42 years since I had been in an education.
25 years ago, Beverly Dorsey was called to the ministry. But the reality of family and career forced her to put those plans on hold. Until now.
You take the scripture where it is and your experience.
Beverly is a part of the fastest growing demographic of seminarians, people over 50. But after 42 years away from school and 25 years after that first call from God, what has drawn Beverly to seminary in her 60s?
When you get to the point that you don't know what else to do because your life has changed so tremendously that you're not the same person anymore, you hear God knocking, saying, okay, what you got to do now? And you say, I don't know. What am I supposed to be doing? So when you get older, you then have to repurpose your life.
Beverly is in the process of repurposing her life. It may not take the form of a second career, but she knows which path she'll be taking.
Women are my ministry, and I know what a wounded female feels like. And I know who she is, and I know what she wants. And I know, for me, that's where I need to be.
I asked Beverly if she's happy now that she's finally getting to pursue her calling.
Satisfying. Yes. Happy is temporary. Satisfaction is everything.
To find out more about the link between aging and spirituality, I sat down with 4 guests in our studio. Reverend Pat Hardaway is founding pastor of Water Christian Church, and she's also my wife. Dr. J. Earhart Brown is president and professor of theology at Memphis Theological Seminary. Rabbi Micah Greenstein is senior rabbi at Temple Israel. And Dr. Maxie Dunham is pastor emeritus and director of Christ Church Global. Their experiences provide insight into the question of how aging relates to spirituality and religion. Pat, you came into the ministry, you received a call when you were in your 40s. You left a comfortable career, you were earning good money, 20-plus year career, and went to school, got your degree, found yourself in the pulpit. My question is, why did you go down this path?
Well, when I was in my early 40s, not too long ago, it was all going well, but I had this real emptiness inside. And so at that stage in my life, I was doing what a lot of people do, and I started asking the very hard questions and those big questions. You know, what is life about? What is my place in it? Who am I? Who is God? And so I was searching and had this real emptiness inside. And so I began to start seeking answers to those big questions in life.
Is this a time where, could you have done this in your 30s?
No. In my 20s and 30s, never would have dreamed. Of course, there was no role models for me either as a woman, but I would have never dreamed I would go into ministry. So that took me off guard a little bit anyway. First of all, I did not like speaking in public, and I had a big fear of that. And so after that, I was called very strongly and became a minister.
You know, Jay, Pat, and both Beverly Dorsey are examples of people over 50 who are in seminary right now. And that, of course, is the fastest growing group, or one of the fastest growing groups. Why do you think people in their midlife or even older are drawn into seminary?
I think there are a variety of reasons for that. Sometimes it's related to a midlife crisis. We all know about the red sports cars, but other folks in the middle of their lives begin to ask questions about what is the meaning of life and what is my place in life, much as Pat has related in her personal story. And so I think there are a wide variety of reasons why people make those decisions, but we have consistently over the last 30 years had 25 to 30% of our student body at Memphis Theological Seminary being people 50 and older.
That's an interesting number. Let's broaden this discussion out to aging and spirituality in general. And my question, the big one I have is there a link between growing older and growing more spiritual? I'll throw it out there. Maxie?
I'm not sure we become more spiritual as we grow older. I think we become more intentional about our spirituality, is the way I would put it.
What do you mean by intentional?
I mean, we become more disciplined in our relationship to God. We become more disciplined in our relationship to the institutions that foster religion.
Michael, what's your take?
I think spirituality means saying that life is a journey through time, and finding meaning through every age and stage of life. And I do think, as I've hit the 50 threshold, that much of life, the first half, is about achievement and success. And at some point, it's about moving from success to significance. And that's what spirituality is all about. It's saying that life is too meaningful to be meaningless. It's about more than the aspiration and the achievement, and that it is about the spiritual quest.
Does death play a role in this? I mean, does our fear of death push us toward God?
Absolutely. All of us begin to experience the aging of our bodies at some point in time, and that raises for us the ultimate questions about death, and that, just like foxholes, drives us to ask questions about who God is and who we are in the bigger scheme of things.
Let's talk about the boomer generation a moment. Is the boomer generation different from our, and I'll say our because it's my generation, from our parents and grandparents? Are we growing different spiritually than they did?
Your wife is the only boomer at the table, so maybe she should talk.
Well, I mean, when you first said that, the first thing I thought of is the difference between an older generation, the seniors and elders. Typically in our churches, they are the ones that are there every week, and they are hanging on your words, and they look forward to that time. It's about community, and it's sometimes the only time they get out of the house. And so church, religion, spirituality becomes even more sacred to them because they know that the longevity is playing into it, and their antennas are up much more spiritually, I've found, than boomers. And boomers tend to be more fix-it type people, and they don't like talking about death all that much, and they don't like necessarily dwelling on the inevitable. But the main thing I've seen is that just the way we put the importance in church and spirituality, going to the synagogue or mosque, is it's maybe second or third place with boomers, and it's first place with elderly.
I certainly agree with that. I think the boomer generation grew up in a time when all institutions came into question. And that's why we've seen this growth in the number of people who are not affiliated with the religious community but talk about themselves as being spiritual because they're trying to find this individual quest for a relationship to God or whatever a person might call the higher power. And I think what most of us who have devoted ourselves to religious life know is that that kind of spirituality is awfully hard to sustain over time. That for spirituality to be authentic and well-grounded, one really needs the community of believers And I think the sharpening of iron with others who are on this quest together is absolutely key. And I think boomers may have come to that later in life because of this kind of innate distrust of institutions. But many of them are coming back now.
So you're saying you can't really be spiritual without being religious? Do the two go hand in hand, or they?
I would not say that one cannot be spiritual without being religious, but I would say that the kind of spirituality that is disconnected from religious life is, in my way of thinking, a poorer form of spirituality because of its disconnectedness.
Our institutions, churches and synagogues represented here, are making really a mistake by not calling this vague spirituality kind of thing into question, and not seeking in a passionate kind of way to connect spirituality with how we get on in life and what our values are and what our rituals are and what institutions we're committing ourselves to.
You just triggered the thought. I find it fascinating when people are asked, where do they feel most spiritual? And they say, on a mountaintop, at the lake. And they're not engaged in the world. In other words, we admire God's handiwork, but if religion is about the word that the three of you have used, I haven't yet, community, that it's not just about humanity's quest for God and God in search of man, but it's in community. Isn't it fascinating that the times when people say they feel most spiritual are when they're completely disconnected from humanity? And so religion is the complement to spirituality. Anyone can say they're spiritual, but who's willing to enter in relationship not just with God, but with where you are? And I'm not Christian, but I imagine that's what Jesus would do.
I think the rabbi has a good notion about who Jesus is.
Well, spirituality.
But do you think that the difference between the two, between the two, it's no one's upset with spirituality, but is that enough?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, spirituality, I mean, most people, I think, believe that it's what you believe. And if you have great faith and you believe, then you're a very spiritual person, and that's not necessarily true. Certainly, you can be religious and not be spiritual, and I've met plenty of those. And again, what you were saying about how we act towards one another in our relationships and how we treat each other and how we choose to live and how we choose kindness over being mean-spirited and that sort of thing, that's being spiritual. So there's a being spiritual, and then there's spirituality, which you believe is just a belief, and I believe it is much more than that.
I ran across an interesting quote from, of all people, General Douglas MacArthur. And he said this, and I just wanted to get your take on this and just get your thoughts. He said, "You are as young as your faith, as old as your doubt." What do you think he's saying there?
I don't know that doubt is such a bad thing. A lot of times doubt will bring you closer, and those doubts are those big questions that help us really ultimately get closer to God.
To those questions, doesn't it?
But
Well, faith and doubt always go hand in hand.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
the two of them are always there in most Christian forms of spirituality. I would assume in Judaism as well. One of my favorite quotes is a quote from a spiritual writer who said in one of her books recently, "Doubt is not the opposite of faith. Certainty is." And
That's a good quote. Let me write that one down.
I like that one.
I think we have tended to operate as if faith and doubt were opposites, but they're not. It's interesting that the root word for religion is the same root from which we get the word ligament. Religion is to tie us together with one another and with God, who is the source of all things. And so that's why I think spirituality and religion have to go hand in hand if they're going to result in the kind of life that the prophets and Jesus called us to.
The older one grows, hope is still possible, that we realize there's more to us than just the physical. And so cherishing the doubts is part of our tradition, I think. And I don't know if it was MacArthur's.
All right, I'd like to thank all of you for being on The Best Times. It's a very good conversation. We appreciate it.